Hey, ladies, I hope you've had a good day of worship and a good start to your new week. So, last week, as we were looking through these Psalms that are bringing us toward the end of Book One of the Psalter, I was really struck by one of the reflection questions that Dr. Russell frequently asks. What kind of person does this psalm or these Psalms invite me to be? In other words, what kind of person can pray these words, can give voice to the words of this psalm? And so for this video, I thought we'd just look back through the Psalms from this week and just ask that question of each one of them. So Psalm 30, and I won't read these. If you want to pause the video and read each psalm as we get to it, that might be a good way to do it. In Psalm 30, I think that this psalm invites us to be people of unwavering trust. Whether we're on the mountaintop or down in the pit, and the psalmist even uses that word twice. This is a psalm that says, the pit, the worst circumstances of my life, are a place where I can encounter God's faithfulness. It's a place of asking God to act in accordance with who He is. So Psalm 30 invites us to be people of unwavering trust, no matter what the circumstances are. And then the flip side of that is, it is a psalm that invites us to be people who, when we experience being lifted out of the pit, when we experience God's acts of rescue and salvation, we respond with praise and testimony, not keeping it to ourselves, but sharing it with the company of the saints. So we are invited by Psalm 30 to be people of unwavering trust and people who praise and give testimony. So we might put it this way: Psalm 30 invites us, when we're in the depths, to call out in faith to the good God who rescues. And it also invites us, when we have been rescued, to make a bold expression of praise in the midst of the community of faith. Psalm 31 invites us to be people who choose to understand life through the lens of truth, rather than through the filter of our particular circumstances. We choose to pay attention to who God says He is and who we are in Him, and allow that to be the filter through which we process the experiences of our lives. And Psalm 31 also invites us to be people who are courageous and hopeful. You see that particularly in verse 24. And we can be courageous and hopeful precisely because we are anchored in the Lord, who is the rock of refuge. Psalm 34, verse 2. Psalm 31, verse 2. So Psalm 31 invites us to fill our minds, our hearts, our imaginations with truth. And where we find truth is in Scripture. To fill our minds and our hearts and our imaginations with Scripture, so that we think and we see and we understand in ways that are consistent with God's own revelation of Himself. And my sisters, that means if we are to fill our minds and our hearts and our imaginations with Scripture, that we will be ruthless in refusing to give space in our minds, hearts, and imaginations to other narratives and other voices. And that may mean that we make some hard decisions about what we will and won't listen to and watch and read. And Psalm 31 then invites us to hope and to wait on God. Remember that hoping and waiting are two sides of the same coin in Scripture. And then we skipped Psalm 32 because Dr. Russell is going to look at it in depth this week. So we moved on to Psalm 33. What kind of person does Psalm 33 invite us to be? Well, first of all, it invites us to be people who worship joyfully and sincerely. You see that particularly in the opening verses of the psalm. And then Psalm 33 also invites us to be people who depend on the Lord, who trust fully in him. And you see that particularly in verses 18 through 22. So we might say that Psalm 33 invites us to worship exuberantly in the company of God's people. Worship is not contemplated here as an individual or private exercise, but as something that we do together with God's people. And I just want to encourage you, if you are not doing that, if you are not congregating with other believers, Psalm 33 urges you to do that. And Psalm 33 also invites us to discard, to just lay aside all the other things that we're tempted to see as sources of security: political power, military might, money, all of those things that say they can make us safe. Psalm 33 says, just forget about those and find your 100% security in the Lord himself. Psalm 34. What kind of person can pray the words of Psalm 34? First and foremost, a person who fears the Lord. That is the main theme of Psalm 34. And verses 12 through 14 of that psalm indicate that fearing the Lord, part of what that means is living in ways that reflect his character. We fear the Lord by imitating him, by submitting to what he says is good and right and beautiful. And then this beautiful invitation in Psalm 34, it invites us to be people who taste the goodness of the Lord. You see that in verse 8. That is a picture of intimacy, of regular experience, not just head knowledge, but regular personal relational encounter with the Lord. And so Psalm 34 invites us to let God's own priorities shape our priorities and to embrace intimacy with the Lord so that we can truly taste and experience his goodness. And if you're not in intimate, relational, daily encounters with the Lord, then I would encourage you, shoot me a message and let's talk about that, because relational intimacy is the norm that these Psalms anticipate and contemplate for the people of God. Psalm 35. What kind of person can pray these words? Well, first and foremost, it's a person who prays boldly for God's justice. Justice on our behalf. We are not reluctant to ask God to do justice and righteousness on our behalf. And that includes asking him to deal with our enemies and our oppressors, to dispel them, to defeat them, and to disarm them, and to make them no longer able to come against us. Psalm 35, as Dr. Russell pointed out very well, invites us to trust God to be the one who works out our vindication. And we express that trust by not taking up arms on our own behalf, whether those are verbal arms or whatever way, whatever weapons, literal or figurative, we might be tempted to pick up. Instead, we ask the Lord to take up the weapon of his righteousness and justice on our defense. So these are the kinds of people that Psalms 30 through 35 invite us to be: people of unwavering trust, people who praise and testify in the company of the saints, people who choose to see and interpret life through a lens of truth, not through our circumstances, people who are courageous and hopeful because we are grounded in a relationship with the Lord, people who worship joyfully and sincerely in the company of other believers, people who depend 100% on the Lord as the source of our security, People who fear the Lord and who demonstrate that by aligning our lives with the priorities that God Himself has shown. People who taste, who chew on and savor the goodness of the Lord in intimate relationship. And people who are not afraid to pray boldly for the justice and righteousness of God to be carried out on our behalf. May we be those people this week. God bless you.